Hello, sports fans. Jim Coyle with Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Thank you for stopping by our YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the subscribe and notifications toggle so you never miss a thing. All of our content up here every day. Looking forward to it. Thank you, and we'll see you on the radio. If you're looking for a great gift for the Indiana sports fan in your life, just go to isbradio.itemorder.com and you'll find plenty of options, including sweatshirts, hoodies, t-shirts, pullovers, caps, and much more, including our Welcome to the SIG 10 line that benefits the local Boys and Girls Club. That's isbradio.itemorder.com. isbradio.itemorder.com. Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio here from the Hard Truth Distilling Company studios on this very frigid Friday. But we have got Jeffrey the Greek from Pave Drain Heated Solutions, so we don't need no stinking frozen driveway.
That's right. Take care of that for you.
Absolutely. Zach Osterman, we missed him earlier. He didn't get the link. He may jump on for a second. He broke the story yesterday that Tino Sunseri will be heading to UCLA as their new offensive coordinator, replacing Eric Bieniemy. And it has paid immediate dividends, Greek, as they now flip a four-star quarterback from Arizona to UCLA less than 24 hours after. There's Zach. So we'll bring him in just to talk about this before we get to the championships. But Zach Osterman joining us as well as Jeffrey the Greek. And Zach, I just kind of set up the fact that you broke that story yesterday of Tino Sunseri leaving Indiana to become UCLA's new offensive coordinator after this completion of this season. And congratulations to him for that. And it paid immediate dividends for UCLA as they flip a four-star quarterback. The one thing that I have to ask is the last two times Indiana lost a coach like this, even though they stayed, was Kalen DeBoer, and then it was Kane Womack. And there seemed to be an impact on both ends of those games, those seasons when that happened. Hopefully that's not going to be the case here, as Tino is staying with the program through the end of whenever that comes.
Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry. Both of your emails went to my junk folder. I don't know why.
Well, that's because I'm a junky person. So
no, it makes me feel better. My boss's emails go to my junk folder all the time too. It's very frustrating. I don't know why.
Convenient. That's convenient, Zach. That's what I'm thinking.
It is about me forgetting to enter my payroll hours, and then it's not convenient anymore. No, I mean, listen, I saw some UCLA fans, and this is just on Twitter, but I saw some UCLA fans sort of saying, what a great hire. We got Indiana's offensive coordinator. Obviously, I think it's a great hire for UCLA. I think it is important to note it is not, Tino Sunseri is not Indiana's offensive coordinator. Mike Shanahan's its play caller. Shanahan and Cignetti have very much collaborated on this offense for a long time. Now, I think what might be instructive in looking forward, I guess I should say, to the question of who Curt Cignetti replaces Tino Sunseri with, is why Curt Cignetti hired Tino Sunseri in the first place, which was that Sunseri was kind of Steve Sarkisian's right-hand man at Alabama when Sarkisian was the OC for Nick Saban before he got the Texas job. And Cignetti wanted basically to bring somebody in that could, kind of talk firsthand about all the stuff Sark was doing in Tuscaloosa, because Cignetti wanted to adapt some of that into his offense. A guy like Tino, and I think this is a little bit the difference to DeBoer and Womack, is he was not full coordinator, unlike those guys. He received co-offensive coordinator as part of his title when he went from James Madison to Indiana. He was already seen as a real rising star at JMU before he came to IU. I think part of the reason Indiana gave him the title bump was to keep him kind of with Cignetti for at least a year. But coaches like Tino Sunseri, quite frankly, you hire them expecting them to leave you. You hire them thinking, he's a really promising young coach. We want him here, because he's going to make us better. And if he makes us better, because he's young, because of the trajectory his career's on, he's going to get a bigger job soon. And I think everybody could recognize that Tino was going to get a full OC shot soon. I think probably there are some personal connections here. Deshaun Foster was with the Panthers at the same time that Tino's dad, Sal, was the Panthers D-line coach, and Tino used to hang out at the Panthers facility all the time. So I'm guessing they know each other, kind of dating all the way back, more than 20 years now. But from Indiana's perspective, while you never want to see good people go out the door, Indiana will have known that if Tino Sunseri continued his good work from James Madison to IU, that this day was going to come fairly soon. And if you're Indiana, you got to do good work in replacing him, and it'll be interesting to see the direction Curt Cignetti goes. But in the same breath, you are keeping both your coordinators, your play callers, the people responsibility for building the larger game plan. Everybody else signed a new multi-year contract. And so I think that it's a loss, but it is one that Indiana will probably have known was possible for, months now, just not maybe knowing exactly where Tino Sunseri would get that opportunity. And B, it's a loss that you would imagine Curt Cignetti has a certain plan for.
Absolutely. I mean, a coach like Cignetti, he probably has a list at all times, like most good ADs do, because that's going to happen, especially if you have success. It's going to happen. But even though Indiana has bumped up its salary pool for the assistant coaches to what is the second in the nation behind Ohio State in an effort to minimize this happening, although this is let's be honest, the goal of these guys are to become head coaches most of the time. Greek, I mean, that's every head coach was an assistant at some point.
Not every, but most. The thing with the change in the offensive room for the Hoosiers that I'll be interested in is it was somewhat of a unique situation to begin with, in that typically speaking, the offensive coordinator, also the quarterback coach, and that's kind of how you want it. You want the trigger man to have a direct line to the offensive coordinator. And I'm not saying it wasn't before, but would Shanahan take over that quarterback room, or are they going to go find another Sunseri? That's what'll be interesting to me. Being inside locker rooms like that, sometimes it's amazing how often one coach can make a huge difference, and I don't know the ins and outs exactly how the game plan is built, how much communication was going on between essentially the three entities, Shanahan, Sunseri, and the quarterback. Like, we know it was happening, but now that's going to be changed up a little bit moving forward. So that'll be interesting to see how Siggy and Shanahan address that. Are they going to just bring in a new quarterback coach? I don't know if Zach's got any information on what the game plan is for that.
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly the direction they're going, and I don't think, in part because Tino's going to stay around, as Jim said, through the playoff, I don't think Indiana feels like they got to get somebody in the door tomorrow, because they have someone that can literally do like the on-field work in practice. Shanahan's never coached quarterbacks. He was a receiver at Pitt. Yep. That's actually kind of his background with Tino, as they both were Pitt guys. He's always coached receivers, and actually Cignetti said, when Cignetti went to James Madison, he brought Shanahan with him as his receivers coach and his recruiting coordinator. He had a guy named Shane Montgomery, who was his QB's coach and OC. Montgomery left. I forget where for. He's at UMass now. Cignetti promoted Shanahan to offensive coordinator, and he said that actually, I mentioned earlier, like one of the main reasons he hired Tino was to get kind of that sort of absorb some of that Sark offensive identity off of Tino. But he's actually said that he liked the dynamic of how it worked, that his quarterbacks coach, ultimately there's an extent to which coaching quarterbacks is kind of the most intensive job in the offense, because quarterbacks have to grasp so much and process so much and develop so much. And he kind of liked splitting those responsibilities so that the guy that needed to worry about building the game plan, calling plays, coordinating the offense week to week, didn't also have to work with the quarterbacks, because that's basically the two, other than maybe offensive line, that's like the two biggest jobs in the offense. And he kind of, I mean, a lot of that was, I think a lot of his trust in that was basically Shanahan and Sinceri being able to work well together and their relationship. So maybe that'll factor into it as well, who he hires next. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if he goes for a similar setup where he goes for a quarterbacks coach who maybe has co-OC or assistant OC in his title, but it's really much more QBs. Because, like, Jim brought up Kalen DeBoer a couple minutes ago. When Indiana hired DeBoer, they moved Nick Sheridan from quarterbacks to tight ends because DeBoer wanted to be OC and QB's coach. But if you were at practice, on a regular basis, you would see DeBoer turn the quarterbacks over to Sheridan pretty consistently because he trusted Sheridan. Obviously, he's taken him with him to Washington and now Alabama, but also because DeBoer had to be able to get around to all the different position groups and observe things, help coach things, and have a grasp of what's going on all the burners on the stove, so to speak. So I wouldn't be shocked if Cignetti kind of looks at that and says, I had a good experience with not giving my OC the added responsibility, but having a dedicated QB's coach that could work collaboratively, but basically split up those two really important duties. I mean, we'll see. Because I do think
definitely unique.
No, it is. And I think it is worth saying. I think it also worked because Tino and Shanahan worked so well together. And I mean, Tino,
there you go.
I think they basically played at Pitt like maybe they were like a year apart or 2 years apart. But like the point is they were teammates in college. They've known each other forever. So I think that really was part of it. But I wouldn't be shocked to see Cignetti pursue a similar dynamic if he can find a person he feels like can do it.
And that's why you see these coaches. That's why you see these coaches stay within their tree because that level of trust, it's a big thing. These egos are rampant with these college coaches. You bring in somebody that's got the same level of ego that, maybe Siggy is at and Shanahan's at, and suddenly says, no, I need things done this way with how I coach quarterbacks. That's what you bring into the table with that. So it's a big hire, moving forward. I'm sure Siggy saw some of this going. I'm sure it's going to be somebody that played the position. It'll just be interesting to see. And then obviously pretty quickly after that, there's going to be a different quarterback in Bloomington as well. So it's Indiana football, man. It's the mecca right now of interesting conversations. So it's going to be cool to see how this transpires.
My question is, how is this going to affect recruiting because of the timing, and whether what Indiana is going to do with the quarterback position, I'm not sure. I'm sure I would think that they're going to try to bring in another experienced quarterback if that is the case, because now you're looking at a situation where there are guys that will want to come to Indiana, but part of that was to play for someone like Sunseri, who has had success. We see immediately he gets the quarterback flip at UCLA. So I'm wondering if that may impact the recruiting as far as the quarterbacks go.
No, I mean, like he was central in recruiting Curtis Rourke, and obviously Indiana didn't wind up getting Julian Lewis, but even being kind of at the final table for a player like Julian Lewis, a lot of that was Tino as well. I think the one thing that is, I think, particularly relevant to this conversation, and I forget which of us asked Cignetti about it, but sometime early in the season, like first half of the season, one of us asked Cignetti in a press conference, like for kind of an evaluation of Shanahan's play calling so far that year. And did he feel like, the way it was phrased, he said something like, the reporter said something like, do you feel like Mike Shanahan's doing a good job with his offense? And Cignetti kind of like deadpanned back, and he was joking, but I
remember this moment.
Kind of wasn't. He says, "Well, it's my offense, right?"
Yes, he did.
So when you're talking about quarterback, I mean, even go back to the driving force behind hiring Tino Sinceri. The reason that he did this, the reason he was so enamored with Sark's offense was JMU didn't play in the COVID fall. FCS postponed its season until the spring of 21 because of attendance concerns. And JMU was still in the FCS at that time. So Cignetti decided he was just going to pick a team and do like just a really deep dive on what they were doing offensively look at all their film, chart all their plays, whatever. And he just like fell in love with what Sark was doing at Alabama as OC. So like the whole reason for hiring Tino was absorbing through Tino a lot of what Tino had helped Sark do at Alabama. And when you remember that, like, yes, that made Tino really valuable, but it was also like the more sort of like fundamentally instructive piece of that is you had a head coach that is constantly thinking about and evolving his offense because it is his offense. When he promoted Mike Shanahan to offensive coordinator at JMU, he was doing that in part because Shanahan had been with him so long and had such a good understanding of what Cignetti wants to do offensively that he trusted him to be OC, to call plays, and to manage that side of the ball. So when you're talking about, personnel and recruiting and whatever, like, yes, there's an extent to which quarterbacks coach will be important, and I wouldn't be shocked if we see Indiana move fairly quickly, if for no other reason than because everybody else is going to be moving quickly. We've already seen a decent amount of staff turnover, and you don't want to wind up in a situation where you take too much time and guys that you might want to bring in wind up going somewhere else. Obviously, it's going to be kind of a weird dynamic if they bring somebody in before they play in the playoff, and you almost kind of have two QBs coaches at once. But I do think that, like, most fundamentally, it's Cignetti's offense. It has been pretty much since the beginning of his career. He's the one that evolves it. He's the one that develops it. He's the one that sort of schemes it alongside the coaches that have been with him for a long time. And so I think when you're talking about recruiting another quarterback, which he has said Indiana will go look for a veteran quarterback in the portal. He didn't say to start, but he said it in a way that very much gives you the idea that they're going to look for somebody that comes in to compete for the QB1 job in a serious way immediately. Cignetti, to me, is still the most important person in that conversation. Not that Tino Seminary wasn't.
He's the head coach.
Very important. But Cignetti, not just as a head coach, but as the person who literally, sort of brained up the offense, Cignetti is the most important person there. He is going to be the ultimate authority, no matter who the quarterback's coach is, on who they pursue based on the skill set that he wants, the traits that he's looking for, the opportunity available to whoever they recruit. And we've seen him linked to, Jackson Arnold, I think Miller Moss from USC. There's going to be more guys that aren't in the portal yet because underclassmen can't technically declare for the portal yet, or can't enter the portal yet, at least. But Cignetti's the final authority on that one way or the other, and I think he's going to be the most important person in that conversation.
And if you want to confirm that, if you want to confirm that, just ask Siggy.
Yeah, brained up the offense. That is my favorite quote of the day. I love that. That is awesome. And now changing gears a little bit, a huge weekend, Zach and Jeffrey, that will pretty much cement the rankings. I don't think there's going to be a lot of change. I keep thinking that if Penn State is not moving any further down than they are, if they lose that game, what I do wonder is if Texas loses, do they just swap spots with Georgia? And the CFP keeps this Big Ten SEC thing kind of going, still giving the SEC a home game. And then question number 2, what happens if Clemson beats SMU? Do they stay in the top 12 and just kick Alabama out?
That'll be the interesting thing. As far as the first question, they're definitely still going to favor the Big Ten and the SEC, as they should. Not that I want to see everybody else kicked out of the playoff. I don't think Indiana is in any real concern, but just to make myself a little bit more comfortable, if I'm a Hoosier fan, I probably go ahead and cheer for SMU in the ACC championship, just to leave absolutely no doubt whatsoever. After that, how the seeding is going to fall, if the favorites win out, I think it's pretty close to what you saw projected on Tuesday night. If there's some upsets, I do think it'll jumble it, but not as much as people think. Again, kind of what we said on the last segment. I don't think the committee wants to set the precedent that if you get into the conference championship game and lose, that you get dinged a whole lot, because I think that would cause a lot of issues, especially with the Big Ten and SEC commissioners. Now, obviously, it's a different story when you get to the Big 12 and ACC, because the Big 12 and ACC are considered such a step down for the Big Ten and SEC. And a lot of times, we're looking at 2 and 3 lost teams in those championships. So the only way those teams can get in is if they win their conference championship. So it's a little bit different deal. But as far as the effect on Indiana, it shouldn't make much difference. And, this is kind of the byproduct that we're seeing with this. The attendance, from what it looks like for Penn State and Oregon, is down. I don't know if you guys have seen, but the ticket prices to get into Indy, I mean, a lot of your listeners here are pretty close to Lucas Oil. I think you can get in. I think you could drive in and get in pretty cheap tomorrow night if you want to go check out some Big Ten football. And why is that? If you're an Oregon fan, you're a Penn State fan, you're into the college football playoff either way. If you're an Oregon fan or a Penn State fan, you got to save up potentially to go to the first round college football playoff game. So maybe I don't want to travel all the way into Indianapolis. So these Big Ten or these conference championship games are taking a little bit of as is. So I just don't think the committee is going to drop the top conference losers down very much.
Yeah, I think there is a fascinating and layered discussion about the conference championships. And, if we're talking about the rankings, if Penn State loses heavy, if Texas loses heavy, do they really get dinged? Because Penn State would have one more win than Ohio State, for example, but Ohio State, they both be 2 lost teams, and Ohio State did beat Penn State at Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that stuff is largely superfluous, and yes, it affects seeding and who plays who where. But as Jeff said, broadly speaking, I think with maybe one exception, which is the ACC championship game, we kind of feel like all these teams are in. It's a question of where they're playing, and at a certain point, I get you want to host a game, but if you're in the college football playoff, it's going to be hard. So you just kind of have to embrace that.
Right.
The more fascinating,
I would say the big facet is where you want to stay, understanding that you're going to get kicked off the 1, 2, 3, or 4 line. You want to stay at 5, 6, 7, or 8. That's the key.
Right, yeah.
Is could a team go from 8 to 9, 8 to 10, because now you're losing the whole playoff game. We're still kind of seeing how this is going to get worked out with these conference championship games and how the committee is looking. So that is what adds to the intrigue this weekend.
I think the more fascinating conversation for me, and we already saw the committee open a real can of worms last year when it didn't let Florida State in. And I get that there was at least an argument for leaving Florida State out with Jordan Travis injured and everything. But we have spent 12 months sifting through the fallout of that, with teams considering leaving the ACC, with the questions of how we have devalued winning conference championships. It would only intensify if SMU were to lose to Clemson and then be essentially ejected out of the top 12 or top 11, if you want to see it that way, for a 3-loss Alabama team. And the reason why is, you make good points about, number one, those fan bases, I know they have bigger fish to fry. The conference championship is only one, is only one sort of facet of what they're playing for in the next month. Number two, obviously, listen, this is going to be a factor for the Big Ten more so than the SEC, because while the SEC could contain geographically a fair amount of its expansion, the Big Ten, because it could not do that the way the SEC could, had to go coast to coast. It's just no matter. I've seen people say, "I'll play the game in Chicago." You're not going to get Oregon fans to play in Chicago any more than Indianapolis in December. It's a long way to go when there are other games on the horizon that might be just as important, if not in some ways more important to them. Conference championship games, though, exist purely to make TV money. That is why
for sure
started. When Roy Kramer came up with the SEC championship game in the early 90s, it was completely and totally driven by his partnerships or his relationship with ABC, his conference's relationship with ABC. That is why they exist. And the difficulty you have here, and this is where you're kind of seeing the collision of conference concerns versus national concerns, is if you start setting a precedent, and people roll their eyes at this, but I promise you it will become a concern going forward. If SMU loses to Clemson and the committee leaves SMU out and basically says a 3-loss SEC team is worth more than a 2-loss ACC team that also has 2 more wins, then people will start asking whether it's worth skipping conference championship games or trying to angle to not play in them or whatever. And the problem you have there is conference championship games. And again, I've seen people talking about tickets. Ticket sales are great. Ticket sales are not what conference championship games are there for. They are television products. And if you start cheapening them, if the committee does things that start cheapening them, then it will start losing the conference's money at the expense of making the playoff more money. And that is a dangerous precedent to set when everybody in the room here, like it's an uneasy sort of standoff because everybody's kind of against each other, but everybody has the same sort of needs and common goals. Like the committee obviously would be spared all this headache if SMU wins. But if Clemson wins, what the committee does with SMU is going to be really, really impactful one way or another on the future of conference championship games. And I don't know if, like, when we get so wrapped up in, not the three of us, but I see it on Twitter, when we get so wrapped up in this game should be played here instead of there, and the attendance this and whatever, like, that's not the bigger threat to the value of these games. The bigger threat is the idea of setting that precedent that you can qualify for your conference championship, lose it, and get knocked out of the playoff.
But they still want those. They still want those crowd shots of panning back and actually seeing people in the stands. So like there's a lot of factors in there for sure. By the way, I want to give a shout out to our gal Gritty Jennifer. She sent me, I think she's put a message out. She's sending me a Sig 10 shirt. I just want to tell her how much I appreciate it. I'll be wearing that during Indiana's playoff game.
We'll look for the picture of that. Jeffrey the Greek.
For sure.
Brought to you by Pave Drain Heated Solutions. Make sure you go. What's the email or the website?
www.pavedrain.com.
Pretty easy. Zach Osterman, the IU Insider for the Indy Star. Congratulations on breaking that story yesterday again, and look forward to all that you do. Appreciate you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Jim. Sorry I was late. Sorry about the email.
That's okay. It's worked out great, man. Hello, sports fans. Jim Coyle with Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Thank you for stopping by our YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the subscribe and notifications toggle so you never miss a thing. All of our content up here every day. Looking forward to it. Thank you, and we'll see you on the radio. If you're looking for a great gift for the Indiana sports fan in your life, just go to isbradio.itemorder.com, and you'll find plenty of options, including sweatshirts, hoodies, t-shirts, pullovers, caps, and much more, including our Welcome to the Sig 10 line that benefits the local Boys and Girls Club. That's isbradio.itemorder.com. isbradio.itemorder.com.